14 Lessons in Yogi Philosophy and Oriental Occultism by William Walker Atkinson. Chapter 1. The First Three Principles. It is with sentiments of no common magnitude that we address ourselves to our students of the Yogi class of 1904. We perceive, as they perhaps do not, that for many among them, this series of lessons shall serve as seed sown in fertile soil, which will, in due course, emit sprouts that shall gradually force their way into the sunlight of consciousness, wherein they will foliate, blossom, and bear fruit. Many of the fragments of truth which shall be presented to you may not be recognized by you at this present juncture. However, in years to come, you will acknowledge the verity of the impressions conveyed within these lessons, and then, and only then, will you truly assimilate these truths as your own. We purpose to address you precisely as though you were assembled before us in person, and as though we stood before you in the flesh. We remain convinced that the bond of sympathy between us shall soon wax so potent and tangible that, as you peruse our words, you will sense our presence almost as acutely as if we were with you in person. We shall be with you in spirit, and, pursuant to our tenets, the student who resides in harmonious sympathy with his instructors genuinely establishes a psychic connection with them, and is consequently enabled to comprehend the spirit of the teaching and to receive the benefit of the instructor's thought in a degree impossible to one who merely peruses the words in cold print. We are assured that the members of the class of 1904 will achieve harmony with one another, and with us from the very inception, and that we shall attain results that will astonish even ourselves, and that the term of the class will mark a wondrous spiritual growth and unfoldment for many within the group. This result would prove impossible were the class composed of the general populace, wherein the adverse thought vibrations of many would counteract, or at least retard, the impelling force generated within the minds of those who are in sympathy with the work. Yet we shall not be compelled to surmount this obstacle, as the class has been recruited exclusively from that category of students who maintain an interest in the occult. The announcements disseminated by us have been phrased in such a manner as to attract the attention solely of those for whom they were intended. The mere thrill-seekers and faddists have not been enticed by our call, whereas those for whom the summons was intended have listened and have hastened to communicate with us. As the poet has sung, "Where I pass, all my children know me." The members of the class, having been drawn to us, and we to them, will form a harmonious body laboring with us toward the common end of self-improvement, growth, development, and unfoldment. The spirit of harmony and unity of purpose shall effect much for us, and the united thought of the class, coupled with our own, shall stand as a tower of strength. Each student shall receive the benefit thereof, and shall be strengthened and sustained thereby. We shall adhere to the system of instruction of the East, rather than that of the Western world. In the East, the instructor does not pause to substantiate each statement or theory as he articulates or propounds it, nor does he provide a blackboard demonstration of spiritual truths, nor does he debate with his class or solicit discussion. On the contrary, his teaching is authoritative, and he proceeds to deliver his message to his students precisely as it was transmitted to him, without pausing to ascertain whether they universally concur with him. He remains indifferent as to whether his statements are accepted as truth by all, for he rests assured that those who are prepared for the truth he teaches will intuitively recognize it. And as for the others, if they are not prepared to receive the truth, no amount of argumentation will ameliorate the situation. When a soul is prepared for a spiritual truth, and that truth, or a portion thereof, is uttered in its presence or presented to its attention by means of writings, it will intuitively recognize and appropriate it. The Eastern teacher comprehends that much of his pedagogy is but the sowing of seed, and that for every concept the student apprehends initially, there shall be 100 that will enter the sphere of conscious recognition only after the lapse of time. We do not imply that the Eastern teachers demand the student accept with blind faith every truth presented to him. On the contrary, they instruct the pupil to accept as truth only that which he can verify for himself, for no truth is truth to an individual until he can demonstrate it through his own experimentation. However, the student is taught that before many truths may be so substantiated, he must develop and unfold. The teacher requests only that the student repose confidence in him as an indicator of the way, and he says in effect to the student, "This is the path. Enter upon it, and along the way you shall discover the things of which I have taught you. Handle them, weigh them, measure them, taste them, and know for yourself. When you attain any point of the path, you shall comprehend as much of it as did I or any other soul at that particular stage of the journey. Yet, until you reach a specific point, you must either accept the statements of those who have preceded you or reject the entire subject matter regarding that specific juncture. Accept nothing as final until you have verified it. But, if you are wise, you will avail yourself of the counsel and experience of those who have gone before. Every man must acquire knowledge through experience, yet men may serve others as indicators of the way. At each stage of the journey, it will be found that those who have advanced somewhat further upon the path have left signs, marks, and guideposts for those who follow. The wise man will utilize these signs. I do not solicit blind faith, but only confidence until you are able to demonstrate for yourselves the truths I transmit to you, as they were transmitted to me by those who preceded me. We request the student to exercise patience. Many matters which may appear obscure to him initially will be elucidated as we progress. Man is a far more complete being than is generally conceived. He possesses not merely a body and a soul. Rather, he is a spirit possessing a soul, which soul commands several vehicles for expression, these various vehicles being of differing degrees of density, with the body constituting the lowest form of expression. These distinct vehicles manifest upon differing planes, such as the physical plane, the astral plane, inter alia, all of which shall be expounded upon as we proceed. The true self is pure spirit, a spark of the divine fire. This spirit is enveloped within numerous sheaths, which impede its full expression. As man advances in development, his consciousness ascends from the lower planes to the higher, and he becomes increasingly cognizant of his higher nature. The spirit encompasses within itself all potentialities, and as man progresses, he unfolds new powers and new qualities into the light. The Yogi philosophy teaches that man is constituted of 7 principles, being a septenary entity. The optimal manner in which to conceive of man is to recognize that the spirit is the true self, and that the lower principles are but confining sheaths. Man may manifest upon 7 planes, that is, the highly developed man, for the majority of men of this age can manifest only upon the lower planes, the higher planes remaining as yet unattained by them, although every man, however undeveloped, possesses the 7 principles potentially. The first 5 planes have been attained by many, the 6th by a few, and the 7th by virtually none of this race at this present time. The 7 principles of man. The 7 principles of man, as recognized in the Yogi philosophy, are enumerated herein, English nomenclature being utilized in lieu of Sanskrit terms, insofar as is feasible. 7. Spirit. 6. Spiritual mind. 5. Intellect. 4. Instinctive mind. 3. Prana or vital force. 2. Astral body. 1. Physical body. We shall briefly delineate the general nature of each of these 7 principles, that the student may comprehend future references to them. However, we shall defer our detailed treatment of the subject until a subsequent point in the lessons. 1. The physical body. Of all the 7 principles constituting the human entity, the physical body is indisputably the most palpable. It occupies the lowest rung on the scale and represents the crudest manifestation of the individual. Yet, this reality does not imply that the corporeal form should be disdained or neglected. On the contrary, it is a vital principle necessary for the growth of man in his present stage of development, serving as the temple of the living spirit, and it must be carefully tended and nurtured to render it a more perfect instrument. We have but to survey our surroundings to observe how the physical bodies of various individuals exhibit differing degrees of development under mental control. It is the duty of every cultivated individual to train his body to the highest degree of perfection so that it may be utilized to optimal advantage. The body must be maintained in excellent health and condition and disciplined to obey the mandates of the mind, rather than permitting it to rule the mind, as is so frequently the case. The care of the body under the intelligent dominion of the mind constitutes a significant branch of Yogi philosophy, known as Hatha Yoga. We are currently preparing a concise treatise on Hatha Yoga, which will soon be ready for publication, intended to impart the Yogi teachings regarding this most essential branch of self-development. The Yogi philosophy posits that the physical body is constructed of cells, each harboring a miniature vitality that governs its function. These animate units are, in truth, fragments of intelligent mind possessing a specific degree of maturation, enabling the cells to execute their duties with propriety. These particles of intelligence are naturally subordinate to the control of the central mind of the individual and will readily obey orders from headquarters, transmitted either subconsciously or consciously. These cellular intelligences manifest a perfect adaptation for their particular functions. The selective action of the cells, extracting necessary nourishment from the blood and rejecting that which is superfluous, stands as an instance of this intelligence. The processes of digestion, assimilation, etc., demonstrate the intelligence of the cells, operating either separately or collectively in groups. The healing of wounds, the rushing of cells to points where they are most required, and hundreds of other examples familiar to the student of physiology, all signify to the yogi student the presence of life within each atom. To the yogi, each atom is a living entity, pursuing its own independent existence. These atoms combine into groups for a specific objective, and the group manifests a collective intelligence so long as it remains an aggregate. These groups subsequently combine in turn, forming bodies of a more complex nature that serve as vehicles for higher forms of consciousness. When death comes to the physical body, the cells separate and scatter, and that which we term decay ensues. The force that held the cells together is withdrawn, leaving them free to pursue their own paths and form new combinations. Some enter the bodies of plants in the vicinity and eventually find themselves once again in the body of an animal. Others remain in the organism of the plant. Others still abide in the earth for a time, yet the life of the atom signifies incessant and constant change. As a leading writer has articulated, death is but an aspect of life, and the destruction of one material form is merely a prelude to the construction of another. We shall not devote further space to the consideration of the physical, as that is a subject distinct unto itself, and our students are doubtless eager to be guided into subjects with which they are less familiar. Therefore, we shall conclude our discussion of this first principle and proceed to the second, wishing, however, to remind the student once again that the initial step in yogi development consists of the mastery of the physical body and its care and attention. We shall have more to convey regarding this subject before we conclude this course. 2. The astral body. This second principle of man is not nearly as well recognized as its physical brother, although it is closely connected with the latter and is its exact counterpart in appearance. The astral body has been known to humanity in all ages and has given rise to many superstitions and mysteries, owing to a deficiency of knowledge regarding its nature. It has been designated the ethereal body, the fluidic body, the double, the wraith, the doppelganger, etc. It is composed of matter of a finer quality than that composing our physical bodies, yet it is matter nonetheless. In order to provide a clearer conception of our meaning, we direct your attention to water, which manifests in several familiar forms. Water at a certain temperature is known as ice, a hard, solid substance. At a slightly higher temperature, it assumes its best-known form, which we call water. At a still higher temperature, it escapes in the form of a vapor called steam, although the true steam is invisible to the human eye and becomes apparent only when it mixes with the air and has its temperature lowered slightly, at which point it becomes a visible vapor that we term steam. The astral body is the precise counterpart of the physical body and may be separated from it under certain circumstances. Ordinarily, conscious separation is a matter of considerable difficulty, but in persons of a certain degree of psychical development, the astral body may be detached and frequently embarks on journeys. To the clairvoyant vision, the astral body is seen to appear exactly like its counterpart, the physical body, and is united to it by a slender silken cord. The astral body persists for some time after the death of the person to whom it belongs, and under certain circumstances, it is visible to living persons and is termed a ghost. There are other means whereby the spirits of those who have passed on may become manifest, and the astral shell, which is sometimes observed after it has been sloughed off by the soul that has passed on, is in such cases nothing more than a corpse of finer matter than its physical counterpart. In such instances, it is possessed of no life or intelligence and is nothing more than a cloud observed in the sky bearing a resemblance to a human form. It is a shell, nothing more. The astral body of a dying person is sometimes projected by an earnest desire and is, at such times, seen by friends and relatives with whom he is in sympathy. There are many cases of this nature on record, and the student is likely aware of occurrences of this kind. We shall have more to say regarding the astral body and astral shells in other lessons within this course. We shall have occasion to delve into further detail when we reach the subject of the astral plane, and, in fact, the astral body will form a part of several lessons. The astral body is invisible to the ordinary eye but is readily perceived by those possessing clairvoyant power of a certain degree. Under particular circumstances, the astral body of a living person may be seen by friends and others, the mental condition of the persons and the observer having much to do with the matter. Naturally, the trained and developed occultist is able to project his astral body consciously and may make it appear at will, but such powers are rare and are acquired only after a certain stage of development is attained. The adept perceives the astral body rising from the physical body as the hour of death approaches. It is seen hovering over the physical body, to which it is bound by a slender thread. When the thread snaps, the individual is dead, and the soul passes on, carrying with it the astral body, which in turn is discarded just as the physical body was previously. It must be remembered that the astral body is merely a finer grade of matter, serving as a vehicle for the soul just as the physical does, and that both are discarded at the proper time. The astral body, like the physical, disintegrates after the death of the person, and individuals of a psychic nature sometimes observe the dissolving fragments around cemeteries in the shape of violet light. We are merely calling attention to the different vehicles of the human soul, its 7 principles, and we must proceed with alacrity to the subsequent principle. We desire to discourse upon the intriguing phenomenon of the ego departing the physical vessel within the astral body during periods of slumber. It would be our pleasure to elucidate exactly what transpires during sleep, and how one might issue commands to their astral self to acquire specific intelligence or resolve complexities while enveloped in repose. However, that pertains to a distinct phase of our subject, and we must move forward after merely stimulating your intellectual curiosity. We desire that you firmly establish these 7 principles within your intellect, ensuring you fully comprehend the terminology when we employ it at a later juncture. 3. Prana, or vital force. We have previously discussed prana in our treatise, The Science of Breath, which many among you have perused. As stated in that volume, prana is universal energy. Yet, in our current consideration, we shall restrict ourselves to that specific manifestation of prana designated as vital force. This vital force is inherent in all forms of life, from the amoeba to mankind, and from the most rudimentary vegetation to the most exalted animal existence. Prana is omnipresent. It resides within all living entities. Furthermore, as occult philosophy posits that life exists in all matter, in every atom, and that the seeming inanimate nature of certain objects is merely a lesser degree of manifestation, we may deduce that prana is ubiquitous. Prana is not the ego. Rather, it is a form of energy utilized by the ego for its material manifestation. When the ego vacates the physical body during the event we term death, the prana, no longer under the ego's dominion, responds solely to the dictates of the individual atoms or their aggregate groups which constituted the physical form. As the body disintegrates and reverts to its primordial elements, each atom retains sufficient prana to forge new combinations, while the unused prana returns to the great universal reservoir from whence it originated. Prana exists within all forms of matter, yet it is not matter itself. It is the energy or force that animates matter. We have elaborated upon the subject of prana in our previously referenced volume, and we have no desire to consume the student's time by reiterating our prior statements. However, before addressing the subsequent principle, we wish to direct the student's attention to the fact that prana is the fundamental force underlying magnetic healing, much of mental healing, absent treatment, and similar practices. That which has been described by many as human magnetism is, in actuality, prana. In the Science of Breath, we provided instructions for augmenting the prana within your constitution, distributing it throughout the body, strengthening each part and organ, and stimulating every cell. It may be directed toward alleviating pain in oneself and others by transmitting a supply of prana, derived from the atmosphere, to the affected region. It may be projected across such distances as to influence other individuals. The volition of the projector propels and imbues the prana gathered for this purpose, which then finds lodgment within the psychic organism of the patient. Like the Marconi waves, it is invisible to human vision. It traverses intervening obstacles and seeks the individual attuned to receive it. This transmission of prana under the direction of the will constitutes the underlying principle of thought transference, telepathy inter alia. One may envelop oneself in an aura of prana, imbued with potent positive thought, which enables one to resist the adverse thought waves of others, and to exist serenely within an atmosphere of antagonistic and inharmonious ideation. We advise students to review that portion of the science of breath which pertains to the utilization of prana. We propose delving into great detail regarding this phase of the subject during the course of these lessons. However, the science of breath provides a sound foundational concept of the nature of prana and the methods of its application, and students would be well advised to refresh their understanding of this subject. We do not wish to fatigue you with this description of each of the 7 principles, and we are cognizant that you are eager to enter into the more compelling phases of the subject. Yet, it is absolutely imperative that you obtain a lucid comprehension of these 7 principles, so that you may understand that which follows, and to obviate the necessity of being remanded to relearn a lesson you have omitted. We held this intention when we inaugurated this class in November 1903, rather than waiting until January 1904, and we provide the November and December lessons as a supplementary measure, so as to arrive at the more engaging portion of the subject by the January lesson. We shall conclude our discussion of prana and advance to the subsequent principle. However, we trust that you will not depart from this section of the lesson until you have acquired a lucid conception of prana, its qualities, and its uses. Study your copy of the Science of Breath until you grasp the essence of prana. The mental principles. The Western reader who has studied the writings of certain contemporary Western psychologists will recognize, within the instinctive mind, distinct attributes of the so-called subjective or subconscious minds frequently referenced by the aforementioned authors. These writers discovered such characteristics in man, as well as certain higher mental phases, and without pausing for further investigation, they advanced a novel theory. That man is endowed with 2 minds, the objective and the subjective, or as some have designated them, the conscious and the subconscious. This was plausible to a certain degree. However, these investigators set the conscious mind aside and amalgamated all remaining faculties into their subconscious or subjective mind, ignoring the fact that they were conflating the highest and lowest qualities of mind, categorizing them together whilst leaving the intermediate quality in isolation. The theories regarding the subjective and subconscious minds are highly perplexing, as the student finds grouped together the most sublime flashes of genius and the most trivial inanities of the individual of low development, the mind of the latter being almost entirely subjective. To those who have perused these theories, we submit that such reading will significantly assist them in comprehending the 3 mental principles of man, provided they remember that the conscious or objective mind corresponds closely to the intellect principle in Yogi philosophy, and that the lowest portions of the subjective or subconscious mind constitute what the yogis term the instinctive mind principle. Conversely, the higher and sublime qualities, which the Western writers have observed and aggregated with the lower qualities in forming their theories of the subjective and subconscious minds, represent the spiritual mind principle of the yogis, with the distinction that the spiritual mind possesses additional properties and qualities of which these Western theorists have never conceived. As we examine each of these 3 mental principles, you will discern the points of resemblance and the points of divergence between the yogi teachings and the Western theories. We wish it distinctly understood, however, that we do not desire to diminish the acclaim justly earned by these Western investigators. In fact, the yogis owe them a debt of gratitude for preparing the Western intellect for these more comprehensive teachings. The student who has engaged with the works of the referenced writers will find it considerably more facile to grasp the concept of the 3 mental principles in man than if he had never encountered any division in the functioning of the human mind. Our principal rationale for underscoring the fallacy inherent in Western dual mind theories is that, to the perception of the yogi, it is grievous to witness that which he identifies as the supreme manifestation of mind, that which constitutes the seat of inspiration and flashes of genius, that which communes with the pure spirit, and which is merely commencing to awaken in men of cultivation and growth, indiscriminately conflated and categorized alongside the basest mental principle, which, while strictly necessary and utilitarian to man under the governance of his higher faculties, remains an attribute common to the most primitive human, extending to the lower strata of the animal kingdom, and indeed even to vegetative life. We entertain the expectation that the student will divest his intellect of preconceived predilections regarding this momentous subject, and will accord our exposition due consideration prior to rendering a definitive judgment. In our subsequent discourse, we shall explicate the minutiae regarding each of the three mental principles. Chapter 2. The Mental Principles. In our initial instruction, we directed your attention briefly to the three lower principles of man: the physical body, the astral body, and prana, or vital force. We also served as a prelude to the subject of the mental principles, which constitute the fourth, fifth, and sixth, respectively, of the 7 principles of man. For the sake of convenience, we shall again enumerate the 4 higher principles: spirit, spiritual mind, intellect, and instinctive mind. This terminology is somewhat inadequate. However, we adopt it in preference to the Sanskrit nomenclature, which frequently proves perplexing and elusive to the average Western student. The 3 lower principles are the most material in nature, and the atoms of which they are composed are, naturally imperishable, continuing eternally in countless forms and aspects. Yet these principles, insofar as the ego is concerned, are merely instruments to be utilized in connection with a particular earthly existence, just as man utilizes raiment, heat, electricity, and the like, and they form no portion of his higher nature. The 4 higher principles, conversely, combine to constitute the thinking component of man, or the intelligent aspect, so to speak. Even the lowest of the 4, the instinctive mind, contributes to the formation of the higher nature of man. Those who have not contemplated the subject whatsoever are prone to regard as absurd the suggestion that the mind of man functions on more than one plane. Scholars of psychology, however, have long acknowledged the varying phases of mentation, and numerous theories have been advanced to account for the same. Such students will discover that the Yogi philosophy alone provides the key to this mystery. Those who have examined the dual mind theories of certain Western authors will also find it less difficult to conceive of more than one plane of mentality. Upon initial inspection, it would appear that the conscious, reasoning portion of man's mind performed the majority of the labor, if indeed not the entirety of it. However, a modicum of reflection will demonstrate that the conscious, reasoning operation of the mind represents but a small fraction of its task. Man's mind functions on 3 planes of effort, with each plane shading imperceptibly into the planes on either side of it, be it the one immediately superior or the one immediately inferior. The student may conceive of this matter either as one mind functioning along 3 lines, or as 3 minds graduating into one another. Veracity resides in both perspectives, for the absolute truth is too complex to be considered in detail within an elementary lesson. The primary objective is to firmly establish the concept in the mind, to form conceptual anchors upon which to suspend future knowledge. We shall touch briefly upon the several minds, or planes of mental effort, commencing with the lowest, the instinctive mind. For the instinctive mind, we share this plane of mentation with the lower animals, at least in its lower forms. It represents the initial plane of mentation achieved in the scale of evolution. Its lowest phases exist along lines in which consciousness is scarcely evident, and it extends from this humble position in the scale until it manifests a very high degree of consciousness in comparison with its lowest phases. Indeed, when it begins to grade into the fifth principle, it is difficult to distinguish it from the lowest forms of the latter. The primary dawn of the instinctive mind is discernible even within the mineral kingdom, more particularly in crystals and similar structures. Subsequently, within the plant kingdom, it grows more distinct and advanced in the scale, with certain higher families of plants exhibiting even a rudimentary form of consciousness. Then, in the world of the lower animals, increasing manifestations of the instinctive mind are observed, ranging from the almost plant-like intelligence of the lower forms until we reach a degree nearly equal to that of the lowest form of human life. Furthermore, among men we perceive it shading gradually into the fifth principle, the intellect, until in the highest form of man today we observe the fifth principle, intellect, exercising control to a certain extent, and subordinating the fourth principle to it, either wisely or unwisely. However, one must retain this fact. Even the highest form of man carries about with him the fourth principle, the instinctive mind, and in varying degrees employs it, or is employed by it. The instinctive mind is most essential to man in this stage of his development. Indeed, he could not exist as a corporeal being without it, and he may cultivate a most valuable servant of it if he comprehends it. But calamity awaits him should he permit it to retain dominion or to usurp prerogatives belonging to its higher brother. At this juncture, we must direct your attention to the fact that man is still a developing creature. He is by no means a finished product. He has attained his present stage of growth after a toilsome journey, but it is merely sunrise as yet, and the full day remains far distant. The fifth principle, the intellect, has unfolded to a certain degree, particularly in the more advanced men of the present age, but the unfoldment is merely commencing for many. Numerous men are but little more than animals, and their minds function almost entirely upon the instinctive plane. Moreover, all men of today, with the exception of a few very highly developed individuals, have need to be on guard lest the instinctive mind should occasionally unduly assert its power over them when their vigilance relaxes. The lowest phase of the instinctive mind's operation is akin to the same work manifesting in the plant kingdom. The labor of our bodies is performed by this portion of the mind. The continuous labor of repair, replacement, alteration, digestion, assimilation, elimination, and the like, is being performed by this part of the mind, all occurring below the plane of consciousness. The wondrous operation of the body, in health and in sickness, is faithfully executed by this portion of our minds, entirely without our conscious knowledge. The intelligent function of every organ, part, and cell of the body is under the superintendence of this part of the mind. Read in Science of Breath regarding the marvelous process of the circulation of the blood, its purification and related matters, and realize, albeit faintly, what a miraculous work is performed by even this lowest phase of the instinctive mind. We shall demonstrate more of its operations in our forthcoming work, Hatha Yoga. Yet any academic physiology will provide you with a lucid concept of what it accomplishes, although the author of such a text does not articulate the cause behind it. This portion of the instinctive mind's labor is executed with excellence in the lower animals, plants, and in man, until the latter begins to unfold a modicum of intellect, at which point he often begins to interfere with the operations properly appertaining to this plane of the mind, and transmits to it adverse suggestions, thoughts of fear, and similar detriments. However, this tribulation is but temporary, for when the intellect unfolds somewhat further, it perceives the error into which it has fallen and proceeds to rectify the difficulty and prevent its recurrence. Nevertheless, this constitutes merely a portion of the province of the instinctive mind. As the animal progressed along the scale of evolution, certain requirements became necessary for its protection and well-being. It could not reason regarding these matters. Consequently, that wonderful intelligence dwelling subconsciously within the instinctive mind unfolded until it was capable of grasping the situation and addressing it. It aroused the combative instinct in the brute for its preservation, and this action of the instinctive mind, remarkably effective for its purpose and essential to the preservation of the animal's life, remains with us still and occasionally projects itself into our mentality with a surprising degree of strength. There resides a significant quantity of the ancient animalistic fighting spirit within us yet, although we have managed to control it and hold it in restraint, thanks to the illumination obtained from our unfolding higher faculties. The instinctive mind also instructed the animal regarding the construction of its habitation, the necessity of migration before approaching winter, the method of hibernation, and thousands of other phenomena well known to students of natural history. Furthermore, it instructs us in the execution of the numerous actions we perform by instinct, just as it assumes those duties we initially master through the means of our intellect. Duties subsequently transferred to the instinctive mind, which thereafter executes them with automatic or near-automatic precision. It is truly astonishing to observe the sheer volume of our daily endeavors that are conducted under the direction of the instinctive mind, subject only to the most cursory supervision by the intellect. When we commit actions to memory or habit, learning them by heart, we have essentially mastered them upon the intellectual plane before relegating them to the instinctive plane of mentation. The seamstress at her machine, the engineer operating his locomotive, and the artist wielding his brush, all discover a valuable ally in the instinctive mind. Indeed, the intellect would rapidly succumb to fatigue were it compelled to consciously perform these quotidian tasks. One must observe the distinct difference between the process of acquiring a skill and the execution of that skill once it has been assimilated. These manifestations of the instinctive mind are, naturally, among its more elevated phases, attributable largely to its contact and subsequent coalescence with the unfolding intellect. The instinctive mind may also be characterized as the habit mind. The intellect transmits concepts to it, which it subsequently executes with literal fidelity, unless it is corrected or provided with superior, or indeed inferior, instructions by the intellect of an individual. This instinctive mind is a peculiar repository, replete with materials derived from a multiplicity of sources. It contains elements inherited through lineage, others that have unfolded from within, the seeds of which were sown at the moment of the primal impulse that initiated life upon its path, and still others received from the intellect, including suggestions from associates and thought waves emanated by other minds that have found lodgment within its corridors. All manner of folly, as well as wisdom, resides therein. We shall address this specific phase of the subject in subsequent lessons under the headings of suggestion and autosuggestion, thought power, etc. The instinctive mind demonstrates varying degrees of consciousness, ranging from almost absolute subconsciousness to the simple consciousness found in the highest of the lower animals and the more primitive forms of man. Self-consciousness arrives in man with the unfoldment of the intellect, a topic that shall be discussed in its appropriate sequence. Cosmic or universal consciousness attends the unfoldment of the spiritual mind and will be addressed at a later juncture. This gradual expansion of consciousness constitutes a most fascinating and significant branch of our subject, and it shall be referred to and elaborated upon at various points throughout this course. Before proceeding to the next principle, we must direct your attention to the fact that the instinctive mind serves as the seat of the appetites, passions, desires, instincts, sensations, feelings, and emotions of the lower order, which are manifest in man as they are in the lower animals. There are, to be sure, higher ideas, emotions, aspirations, and desires that reach advanced man from the unfolding spiritual mind. However, the animal desires and the ordinary feelings, emotions, and the like appertain to the instinctive mind. All feelings pertaining to our passional and emotional nature belong to this plane. All animal desires, such as hunger, thirst, and sexual impulses, and all passions, including physical love, hatred, envy, malice, jealousy, and revenge, form a constituent part of it. The desire for the physical and the longing for the material reside entirely upon this plane. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life are situated here. This principle is the most material of the three mental principles and is the one most liable to bind us closely to the earth and earthly concerns. Remember that we do not condemn material or earthly things. They are appropriate in their proper place. However, in his unfoldment, man grows to perceive these things merely as a means to an end, a singular step in spiritual evolution. With clearer vision, he ceases to be bound too rigidly to the material aspect of existence. Rather than regarding it as the ultimate aim and end of all things, he recognizes that it is, at best, only a means to a superior destination. Many of the brute instincts remain with us and are conspicuously evident in undeveloped individuals. Occultists learn to curb and control these baser instincts, subordinating them to the higher mental ideals that are revealed to them. Do not be discouraged, dear student, should you discover much of the animal still residing within you. It is no indication of badness or evil. Indeed, the very recognition of it is a sign that one's unfoldment has commenced. Previously, the same element was present yet unrecognized for what it was, whereas now it is both perceived and acknowledged. Knowledge is power. Learn to identify the remnants of the brute nature within you and become a tamer of wild beasts. The higher principles will invariably obtain the mastery, yet patience, perseverance, and faith are requisites for the task. These brute elements were appropriate in their time. The animal had need of them, and they served the purpose for which they were intended. However, now that man is attaining higher points upon the path, he sees more clearly and learns to subordinate the lower aspects of his nature to the higher. These lower instincts were not implanted in your nature by a devil. You acquired them honestly. They arrived during the process of evolution as proper and necessary elements, yet they have been largely outgrown and may now be left behind. Therefore, do not fear these inheritances from the past. You may set them aside or subordinate them to higher purposes as you journey along the path. Do not despise them, even though you tread them underfoot. They are the very steps upon which you have reached your present high estate and upon which you shall attain still greater heights. 5. The intellect. We now arrive at the mental principle that distinguishes man from the brute. The first four principles man shares in common with the lower forms of life, but when the fifth principle begins to unfold, he has reached a pivotal stage of the journey along the path of attainment. He perceives his manhood manifesting within him. Now, it must be remembered that there is no violent change or marked transition from the consciousness of the fourth principle into that of the fifth. As we have previously elucidated, these principles shade into one another, blending much like the colors of the spectrum. As the intellect unfolds, It faintly illuminates the fourth principle and endows instinctive life with reason. Simple consciousness shades gradually into self-consciousness. Before the fifth principle dawns fully, the creature possessing the first four principles in a state of high development exhibits passions but no reason, emotions but no intellect, and desires but no rationalized will. It is the subject awaiting the monarch, the sleeper awaiting the magic touch of the one sent to rouse him from the enchanter's deep slumber. It is the brute awaiting the arrival of that which will transform it into a man. In certain lower animals, the fourth principle has attracted to itself the lowest shading of the fifth principle, and the animal manifests signs of a faint reasoning. Conversely, in some of the lower forms of man, the bushman, for example, the fourth principle has scarcely been perceptibly colored by the incoming fifth principle. Such a man is scarcely more than a brute. In fact, he is mentally more of a brute than certain higher domesticated animals, which, having existed for many generations in close companionship with man, have been colored by his mental emanations. The initial indication of the genuine unfoldment of the fifth principle, the intellect, is the dawning of self-consciousness. In order to comprehend this more fully, let us consider the true nature of consciousness. Among the lower animals, there exists very little of that faculty we designate as consciousness. The consciousness of the lower animal forms constitutes little more than mere sensation. Life in its early stages operates in an almost automatic fashion. Such mentation proceeds almost exclusively along subconscious avenues, and the mental activity itself concerns nothing save the physical existence of the animal and the gratification of its primordial necessities. In due course, this primitive awareness evolved into that state which psychologists designate as simple consciousness. Simple consciousness constitutes an awareness of external entities, a perception and recognition of objects distinct from the inner self. Here, conscious attention is directed outwardly. The animal, or the man of a lower order, is incapable of contemplating his hopes, fears, aspirations, plans, or thoughts, and subsequently comparing them with the corresponding mental states of his fellows. He cannot direct his gaze inward to speculate upon abstract concepts. He merely accepts phenomena as given and posits no inquiries. He attempts to ascertain no solutions for internal queries, for he remains oblivious to the very existence of such interrogations. With the advent of self-consciousness, man commences to form a conception of the I. He begins to compare himself with others and to employ reason regarding this comparison. He takes mental inventory and deduces conclusions from that which he discovers within his own mind. He commences to think independently, to analyze, classify, distinguish, deduce, and the like. As he progresses, he begins to resolve matters for himself, transmitting novel and fresh suggestions to his instinctive mind. He begins to rely upon his own intellect, rather than blindly accepting that which emanates from the minds of others. He commences to create for himself and ceases to be a mere mental automaton. And from a mere glimmering of conscious intelligence has flourished the supreme intellect of the present day. A modern author forcibly articulates this growth in the following terms. For some hundreds of years, upon the general plane of self-consciousness, an ascent has been achieved, gradual to the human eye, yet rapid from the perspective of cosmic evolution. In a race, large-brained, walking erect, gregarious, brutal, yet king of all other brutes, man in appearance though not in fact, there was born from the highest simple consciousness the basic human faculty of self-consciousness, and its twin language. From these, and that which accompanied them, through suffering, toil, and war, through bestiality, savagery, and barbarism, through slavery, greed, and effort, through infinite conquests, overwhelming defeats, and unending struggle, through ages of aimless, semi-brutal existence, through subsistence on berries and roots, through the utilization of the casually discovered stone or stick, through life in deep forests with nuts and seeds, and upon the shores of waters with mollusks, crustaceans, and fish for sustenance, through that perhaps greatest of human victories, the domestication and subjugation of fire, through the invention and art of the bow and arrow, through the taming of animals and their breaking to labor, through the long tutelage which led to the cultivation of the soil, through the adobe brick and the construction of habitations therefrom, through the smelting of metals and the slow birth of the arts resting thereupon, through the slow formulation of alphabets and the evolution of the written word. In short, through thousands of centuries of human life, of human aspiration, and of human growth, sprang the world of men and women as it stands before us and within us today, with all its achievements and possessions. Self-consciousness is a concept facile to comprehend, yet arduous to define. One writer has expressed it well in stating that, without self-consciousness, a creature may know. However, only by the aid of self-consciousness is it possible for him to know that he knows. With this unfoldment of the intellect arrived the genesis of all the wondrous achievements of the contemporary human mind. Yet, as magnificent as these achievements are, they are as nothing compared to what lies ahead for the race. From victory unto victory shall the intellect progress. In its unfoldment, as it commences to receive increasing illumination from the next highest principle, the spiritual mind, it shall achieve feats as yet undreamed of. And yet, poor mortal, remember, intellect stands but third from the zenith in the scale of the principles of man. There exist two principles as much superior to intellect as intellect is superior to the principle beneath it, the instinctive mind. Do not deify the intellect. Do not permit the pride of intellect to blind you. The significance of the awakening of self-consciousness may be more clearly recognized when we inform you that the occult doctrine holds that once self-consciousness is awakened into being, once the I has been felt and recognized, the truly awakened life of the soul commences. We refer not to the existence that ensues after spiritual awakening, for that is a yet higher stage, but to the mental awakening of the soul to the I consciousness. This is the stage wherein the embryonic ego first commences its waking existence. Prior to that time, it slumbered on, alive yet unconscious of itself. Now, the hour of labor pains and birth is at hand. The soul must encounter new conditions and surmount many an obstacle before it attains spiritual maturity. Many experiences shall it undergo, and many trials shall it be compelled to face. Yet the progress continues onward, ever onward. At times, there may appear to be setbacks, and it may even seem to retrograde. Notwithstanding, such obstacles are soon surmounted, and the soul resumes its journey. There exists no genuine regression upon the path, and however slow the progress may appear, each of us moves steadily forward. We had aspired to address the subject of the sixth principle, the spiritual mind, in this lesson. However, observing that we possess insufficient space at our disposal, we must defer that most interesting subject, as well as that of the seventh principle, spirit, until the subsequent lesson. We are cognizant that our students are eager to press forward, and we are expending as little time as possible on the way. Nevertheless, there exist certain fundamental truths which must be clearly comprehended before we dare take another step. There are a number of lessons to be derived from the subjects of the instinctive mind and the intellect, and this juncture serves as well as any for their consideration. One of these lessons is that the awakening of the intellect does not necessarily render the creature a superior being, in the sense of moral goodness. While it is true that an unfolding principle or faculty will impart an upward. Do you want access to this and all the complete audiobooks on the channel, plus the ebook version? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code in the left corner of the screen to access our library, where you can listen to your favorite esoteric books without ad interruptions, lock your screen, or use other apps while the narration plays, and even download the ebook version to follow along as you listen. Listen on your computer via web browser, or download the app from the Play Store. After subscribing, you will receive an email with your login details, password, and step-by-step instructions on how to access the books through the Hotmart app.